April 19th, 1897, in Leroy, Kansas. A farmer named Alexander Hamilton, his son, and a farmhand are awakened by strange noises from the cattle pen. Going outside, they discovered, to Hamilton's utter amazement, an enormous airship with a brilliant searchlight is slowly descending over the cow lot. Fearfully, Hamilton moves closer and is startled to find that one of his cows has been caught by a red cable running down from the ship. The next day, after an extensive search, he discovers the cow's hide, legs, and head in a field miles away. This is one of the first recorded cattle mutilations connected with UFOs. The report could easily be dismissed as a tall tale if there were no others. But since then, thousands of bizarre animal mutilations have been discovered, not only in this country, but in Africa, Australia, Brazil, and many European countries, in fact, all over the world.
This book really brings all of this into focus, and I was particularly concerned with some of your research into the past. For example, the Alexander Hamilton story. And I'd love to have you tell that to us, if you would. This goes back to when, 1897?
1897, yes. There was a wealthy farmer who was also a very prominent citizen of the state of Kansas, a member of the state legislature, and very well known throughout the state. He lived at the little town of Leroy, Kansas. And in 1897, one night, he heard quite a rumpus in the cattle lot, and he supposed that maybe one of his dogs was out there harassing the cattle. He jumped up, and his son, who was a teenage boy at the time, got up with him, and they could hear all this noise out there, and just to be on the safe side, they grabbed the nearest substitute for a weapon that they had, a couple of double-bitted axes. And they got the hired man up, and he grabbed an axe, and they all went back there. And they all signed an affidavit the following day. And they said that as they approached the cattle lot and came around behind the big barns, they saw a dirigible-shaped thing, which was red in color, and it had some sort of a cabin hanging beneath it and some kind of a big wheel below the cabin, which was turning slowly. And in the cabin, through the transparent windows in this brightly lighted cabin, they could see small human-like creatures, which they said were, by their standards and opinions, hideous. And these creatures seemed to be excitedly talking to each other, although they could not hear what they were saying, the farmer and his men. They found that one of his yearling cattle had a noose around its neck, and the noose was caught in a fence, or the cable was caught in a fence, and the cable went from the fence to the cabin underneath this craft, whatever it was, and the craft was obviously trying to lift this heifer. They were trying to steal it, or just take it, I guess you'd say. Maybe they were collecting samples.
Weren't they just lifting it?
They were trying to, yeah, literally. The hired man ran over to try to chop the cable in two. He accidentally cut the fence in two, and the thing took off with the heifer dangling by the neck beneath it. They found it the following day. They found the hide and hoofs and tail in a wheat field about 7 miles away.
Frank's been talking all day.
When these fellows land, I hope they have a cure for the common cold.
I doubt it. As a matter of fact, they may have a few things we don't want. It was curious to me in 1897 that this thing was as carefully documented as it was.
As you probably notice in the book, I carried all the list of all the bankers and doctors and lawyers and newspaper editors and everybody else who signed the affidavit that they were familiar with the character and reputation of the men involved, including Mr. Hamilton, and also with the other details of the case itself, because when the hide and hoofs were found, it was easy to identify them by, of course, by the brand. So I thought this was one of the best documented cases, and certainly one of the most bizarre cases that I ever ran across in this 20 years of research in this field.
Now, you mentioned in your book that in that year, earthbound dirigibles were not that unusual that I guess there were some experiments going on in France, wasn't it?
No, the Zeppelins never came along. There were a few specimens extant in Europe, but they were very underpowered, and they could not possibly have crossed the...
Yeah, they certainly couldn't have come over here. Also mentioned, I guess as an aftermath of that story, the mystery that surrounded that case when the remains of this young heifer were found, some 3, 4, 5 miles away?
Several miles away in the middle of a wheat field, and there was no indication at all that they had been carried there. They had obviously been dropped there because there were no tracks through the wheat, which would certainly have been there had anyone walked through it.